This presentation is brought to you by the SDG Decision Education Center.
Hello, and welcome to How to Establish a Healthy Decision Culture. This is going to be focusing on the dysfunctional behaviors to watch and is brought to you by SDG Decision Education Center and Texas Executive Education at the University of Texas. I'm Lynn Slattery, Director at Texas Executive Education and manager of a portfolio of programs for busy professionals like yourselves. This portfolio includes the Strategic Decision and Risk Management Certificate program, which brings together the academic research and practical application teaching of UT faculty and 35 years of experience in strategy consulting and decision education by SDG, and serves as the basis for our webinar series. We are proud to be partnering with SDG on this series of programs. I'm excited to introduce today's speakers. Carl Spetzler is an author and consultant with more than 40 years of experience working with top management and boards to make great strategic decisions. He is the lead author of the 2016 book, Decision Quality. He is a key instructor in several classes in the Strategic Decision and Risk Management Certificate program. Carl is the chairman and CEO of Strategic Decisions Group. Carl, welcome to today's webinar.
My pleasure, Lynn.
Joining Carl today is Jennifer Meyer. Jennifer is a consultant and educator at SDG. She routinely works with corporate leaders and strategy project teams to develop business strategies to meet corporate growth goals. She also works to put in place practices and processes that foster a healthy decision culture. Jennifer is an experienced educator who has developed and delivered several classes in the SDRM program. With Carl, she is co-author of Decision Quality. Jennifer, welcome to today's webinar.
Nice to be here, Lynn. Thank you.
Both Carl and Jennifer are instructors in our upcoming class on human biases in decision making, which will be held on October 28 and 29 in Austin. And you'll see some of the things that coming out of this webinar that will be expanded in that class if you're able to join us. It is now my pleasure to turn over today's webinar to your first speaker. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. So one of the things that we notice in our practice is that many times when we begin working with a team, they're experiencing a lot of frustration. And a couple of things that Carl and I have been talking about lately, a couple of examples of situations where we saw a lot of frustration between the teams and the leadership, we wanted to share with you. A little while ago, I was working with a team in Canada. When I first joined that team, the team had been going back and forth for some time with their leadership. They had developed a new technology for how to extract bitumen, this really sticky, heavy, viscous oil that cannot traditionally be flowed out of the ground. They had come up with some techniques to do that. And the team that had come up with the science here was very excited about doing a development to actually take this area that was far removed from other parts of the company's production and actually start producing this in situ bitumen. They put together a great proposal for their leadership. They were very excited about it. They went to their leadership and the leadership said, no, we're not interested in doing that. So the team went back, they did some more work, they added some more slides, they put together some more data, they made the pitch even more compelling, went back to the leadership, and once again, the leadership said, no, we're not interested in taking this approach, and we're frustrated that you're not listening to us when we say no. So there was quite a bit of frustration within both the team and the leadership. So that was an example of a really challenging situation. And Carl, I think you have another example.
Yeah, let me describe a situation. This is a relatively large medical university teaching and hospital center where there's a clinical side and an administrative side, and the hospital tends to be the biggest part of the operation. And it was a very frustrating environment. This is an organization where people talk about being collaborative and open and transparent, and the actual behaviors are far different. And everybody constantly complained that they're totally bogged down. They couldn't figure out who should be making the decisions. They made decisions, they thought, but they never stuck. They kind of came unstuck after the decision was made. Many dysfunctional behaviors, and in fact, they had no way to really know when they arrived at a decision. And so this was truly bogged down as a decision process, and everybody was frustrated. So what are these situations like, and what do they have in common? First of all, they're examples of what we would call poor decision cultures. And there's the decision culture tends to be central to a whole corporate culture. So we think that poor decision-making practices are very fundamental to corporate cultures. And we'd like to test something with you right away. And this is, if you think about culture the same way we do, there are lots of parts to it. First of all, things like where are we trying to head as an organization? What do we stand for? Who are the people that we really are? How do we work together? Then the stories that are part of the whole organization and the narrative, and the environment in terms of the business environment, but also the natural social environment in the organization. So all these kinds of things are part of culture. It's how we behave around here and who we are, but central to all this is the decision culture. And so when we look at an organization and we find that the decision culture is broken, we find that there is cynicism and a relatively painful corporate environment as well. And I'd like to just test that question with everyone. So is a healthy decision culture necessary to have a truly healthy corporate culture? And so,
okay.
Go ahead.
To put this, we're going to use something where you're going to need your smartphone. We're going to use an application called Mentimeter. So if you can grab your smartphone and go to the website www.menti.com. And once you do that, once you've entered the menti.com website, you'll see that you have the opportunity to enter a code. You'll need a 6-digit code, and that 6-digit code, you'll see it on the screen at the top of the screen here, 578678. And we'll keep that up at the top of the screen for you, but I'll reveal now what the question is that you're going to be answering. Is a healthy decision culture necessary? If the answer to that is, we have a statement here that says, yes, it's impossible to have healthy organizational culture when you have a broken decision culture. You can go ahead and enter your response, with 1 being strongly disagree, all the way to 5 for strongly agree.
You know, there, of course, is a lot more to culture than decision making. One of the things that we see everywhere in culture is the difference between espoused values and values in action. Okay, what people say and what people really do. And this is true of decision making as well as all kinds of other things like values in action versus values that are being espoused. And so what we see in organizations is organizations tend to be more healthy when what they say and what they do gets close to being the same. And dysfunctional behaviors are not tolerated in the sense that they violate the values and the norms of the organization.
So it looks like we have a lot of alignment. We're pretty stable at a value of 4.5, a lot of alignment that a healthy decision culture is indeed necessary. So if we all agree that a healthy decision culture is important, why is it that it might not be happening? And unfortunately, there are many kinds of dysfunctional decision behaviors that can compromise an organization's decision making. So if I go back to the example that I was talking about earlier, there were a few things that were coming out that we observed there and also in other places as well. One was there were a lot of hidden agendas going on between the project team, who was very adamant about getting their plan put into place, and the leadership team, who was saying no, but wasn't sharing why they weren't interested in taking that particular path. This is something that comes up quite a bit. Another thing that was clearly an issue in this particular case is that both the leadership and the project team had very strong beliefs about what the right thing to do was and how much value was available from that. And they held those beliefs without paying attention to what the evidence actually showed. It was very difficult for the team to even consider another alternative. They were very used to just being able to put up one idea and move that forward. They weren't used to having to put together a good side-by-side comparison of well thought out alternatives. That was definitely a part of their culture to advocate. They used an advocacy process, and they weren't typically considering different alternatives. And the executives reinforced that simply by just saying, hey, we don't like your idea, we're not going to do anything. So that led to some challenges. And there are many other dysfunctions that come up as well. Carl, I think you have a few more from your example.
Yeah, in my example, let me add, first of all, what Jennifer just mentioned in terms of advocacy process. We find that almost universal, and was the case here as well, that it was decision-making was an advocacy approval process, as opposed to a conscious choice among significantly different alternatives as we define in decision quality. So one of the things that was really wrong was that around there, people would say we lack clarity about who has the authority and responsibility for making the decision. Another thing was this: we think we make a decision, but we don't commit the resources at the time. So it's not really a decision. They had a process where they would get together and make decisions. And in that decision meeting, the CFO was not present. And so they would make a decision that they're going to do something. And then later on, there was a separate decision of whether the decision would get funded or not. So it was where do you think the true decisions were being made? And when I called that out in this discussion, then people said, well, then the CFO would have to be part of every decision meeting. And I said, duh, of course. You can't make a decision without committing the resources. So there were fundamental structural things that had built in this dysfunctionality. They also, because of the nature of these medical institutions with a clinical and administrative side, the powerhouses in the clinical side are really true experts and big authorities in their field. And there are a wide range of personalities, and some of them, in a decision-making sense, can be quite dysfunctional, and it ends up being tolerated because of the importance of their capability in the clinical side. Another thing was they didn't have a standard for judging the quality of the decision, so they substituted for decision quality agreement, and there was a lot of agreement around nonsense, as we talk about. Finally, things got stuck because people talked about empowerment and collaboration a lot, but in fact, everything had to go through the president's office, and it would get stuck there for weeks. And finally, people would find a way to get back to the president and get it back to the top of the stack as it was getting down. So those are the kinds of things we see everywhere.
Yes, and in fact, we've been tracking some of these different dysfunctional behaviors that we've seen in a variety of situations. We've got a list of 36 commonly observed behaviors that disrupt the decision-making in an organization and therefore contaminate the corporate culture. And you can imagine that in different situations, different ones of those behaviors are going to come out. And we did a little work a little while ago here in exploring which of those dysfunctional decision behaviors might be common in different situations. We know any troubled culture will have its own mix of challenges. For a recent workshop where we had more than 30 organizations represented, we conducted a survey using Power Noodle, and we asked the individuals who were working with us to choose the top 12 out of that list of 36. what were the 12 dysfunctional behaviors that resonated most with them. And we saw that the top 7 dysfunctions were evident in more than half of the organizations represented. And several of these are different from the ones that we just illustrated. The first one, the one with the most votes, was we only account for and reward outcomes, and we don't systematically look back at decisions. That was a big issue with this particular set of organizations. They also noted that we're more comfortable in action mode rather than in decision mode. So we adopt a bias for action that we later regret. That was the next most popular. Here's the one that Carl mentioned. We tolerate dysfunctional behaviors by powerful individuals. That's a fairly common thing. Also, we don't have a decision agenda that addresses our upcoming decisions in a systematic way, and that leads to some real confusion. Another one on the list, we don't frame decisions, we declare a problem, and then we plunge in and start solving it, and we think that's all we need to do. Another one, like the example that I shared, we seldom have a real side-by-side comparison of well thought out alternatives, even on big decisions. And the last of the top 7, we have no standard for judging the quality of a decision, and that came out in Carl's example as well. So as you can imagine, if we conducted this survey within a single organization, we would have some different patterns, and they give us a good start at understanding what the current decision culture is. So after we asked the participants to vote the top 7 issues or dysfunctional behaviors that come up, the next thing we did within PowerNoodle was to ask them to rate the frequency. On this x-axis here we have how often do you encounter this challenge on a scale of 0 to 4, and also the importance, how valuable would it be to overcome this particular challenge. And the group averages showed a shift in priority. So number 1, the one that got the most votes in terms of really resonating with people, still had a really high score in terms of how often it comes up and also how valuable it would be to overcome it. The second one, we're more comfortable in action mode than decision mode. That one wasn't quite as highly rated in terms of its frequency and its importance, but some other ones rose to the top, like number 3, we tolerate dysfunctional behaviors by powerful individuals, and also number 7, we have no standard for judging the quality of a decision. So these group averages give us some interesting insight into what the pattern is within the group that's actually taking the survey. We might also be interested in thinking about what the distribution of results is. And within PowerNoodle, we can take a look at that. Here's number 5, the one about we don't frame decisions, we declare a problem and plunge in. You can see here that we had a group of people, more than one person said that it happens all the time and it would be really valuable to overcome this. But we actually did have one person who said it doesn't come up quite that often and it wouldn't be that valuable to overcome it. So
Jennifer, let me just add here that there are so many ways to be dysfunctional.
Right.
And so it really has to be, you have to have a specific organization to diagnose it correctly and try to get a sense of what are the important ones.
Right. And within an organization, if we saw a spread like that within a single organization, we would have more digging to do to understand more what was behind them. Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, what does a healthy decision culture look like? And I'll hand back to Carl on that one.
Well, we'll use Mentimeter again, okay? And so think about a couple of keywords that for you would describe a healthy decision culture. And we're going to create a word cloud. And you go back to Mentimeter, enter, www.menti.com, enter 578678, and then type in a word or another word up 3 from the beginning. And when you see one that really resonates with you, you can repeat that word, and you'll see that over time, the ones that you guys like the most will grow. And we're starting to see this word cloud forming in front of us. I can see that transparency is quite central to this and seems to be staying in there. Now we've got deliberate trust, alternatives, open. I guess that gets similar to the transparency structured. This is great fun here. Look at this. We will be happy to share this with you all afterwards as a start towards defining the destination. Of course, it has to fit the organization. Okay, so I would say a healthy decision culture is just like physical health in our lives. It would be different for different ages and stages in life, and it would be different for different personalities and so on. So you have to fit it to the purpose and to the organization. It looks like trust is now risen above transparency even. And
Carl, there's a couple of things I'm noticing there. Transparent and transparency have been pretty prevalent for quite a bit of this time. And of course, there's a real desire for that. And it's an interesting question to consider whether decisions can always be transparent.
They can't always be transparent, but you can have an organization where there's such a high trust component that when people say we're going to be transparent, then people recognize when you're not being transparent, it's for a good reason. And it could be for liability reasons and legal reasons. It could be because it would violate a personal, sensitive relationship question and so on. But I think most organizations are pretty aware of the nature of the pressures on the leadership in terms of setting the kind of decision structure and decision approach and culture.
Another one that's interesting here is the idea of collaboration. That's one that comes up quite a bit in a healthy decision culture, but there are actually examples where you can have a healthy decision culture without having it be collaborative. Those are somewhat unique.
Well, you could have autocratic or authoritarian regimes that could be healthy. Okay, and certainly if you're in the emergency response business, you don't want some kind of a big collaborative, slow process that, in fact, speed and having order overrides some of the collaboration. And then the same group could be very collaborative when they're not in the emergency response mode. Okay?
Right.
So
culture can evolve.
I think decision processes have to fit the need. They always have to be fit for purpose.
Another interesting aspect is the idea of dissension coming out. We don't have a lot in here about the idea of conflict, but in fact, conflict is a critical component of a healthy decision culture as long as it happens at the right time.
Well, Jennifer, I can't emphasize that more. I had one client where they allowed people at the time of decision to kind of nod, but not really commit. And those people that had disagreed earlier were always in a blame, I told you so mode if they took a risk and it turned out badly. That is the outcome. The decision was a good one, at least at the time, and with hindsight, it had a bad outcome. And so conflict before the decision is fuel. You want the conflict of different mindsets, perspectives, alternatives, advocacy positions, and you want open conflict, not name calling, but a conflict of ideas. And once you make a decision, you may not agree, but you commit. And there are many cultures that now have made that part of their core principles. You have the right to disagree, but once we make a decision, you do not have a right not to commit and to act and get in lockstep and lock arms and you execute together. Conflict is poison on the execution side. Conflict is fuel on the decision side before the decision.
Well, we've got some very interesting results, and we seem to have a lot of alignment on a number of the key components of what it takes to create a healthy decision culture. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that. And the next question is, if we are well aligned on what a healthy decision culture looks like, how do we actually establish it if we don't already have it?
Yep.
So we have to start with an understanding of where we are, and then we have to have a clear idea of where we want to go. So we showed you an example of some of the 36 specific decision dysfunctions that we have encountered. And if you start with a diagnosis within your organization and you gather input from all of the different decision participants, whether it's decision makers, subject matter experts, those that are affected by the decisions, the implementers that are key to execution, if you can get input from that entire group about which of those dysfunctions they observe and are concerned about, if you can do that anonymously and encourage people to share candidly, you can get some very interesting insights into what's happening in your culture. And if you start a dialogue with something like a diagnostic and encourage people to share and help develop a plan for improvement, you can actually get some very interesting insights. You can also have the participants rate, just like you saw earlier, the frequency and importance of those different decision functions. That can give you a great starting point for what you might need to look at to improve your decision culture. And it might also help you identify some low-hanging fruit, some things that you can do pretty easily to improve your decision culture.
Let me add something here, Jennifer. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, finding a dysfunction and finding a solution, okay? That is, in fact, it just sheds light to understand the priorities on the dysfunctions to create a plan. But often, like shifting a decision process or something like this may solve 5 dysfunctions, okay?
Right, yeah. And that comes to the second piece of what is the vision of a healthy decision culture. When we do the work to do an assessment like we just talked about, one of the things that's important is to actually synthesize that into a picture of the things that we should be doing and the things that we should stop doing. So for example, we will have a healthy decision culture when we are doing the following. It might be about keeping a proactive decision agenda. It might be about engaging people more broadly, or creating a safe space for that conflict that's necessary during the decision process. This list of the things that you want to be doing will be tailored specifically to what your organization is, where your organization currently is. At the same time, you want to think about what things should we stop doing. For example, we should stop allowing the private hallway conversations to be the places where the decisions actually get made, or blaming, as Carl mentioned, when we have bad outcomes after taking smart risks. So that process of doing a diagnostic to understand where we are, and then also using that to synthesize a clear picture of where we're going, where we want to end up, that's a great starting point. And then the question is, how do we actually get there? And we need to develop a plan for that.
Yeah, and it's, you know, this kind of change effort is like every other classical organizational change effort. And that, now that you have an idea of where you want to go and your starting point, you pick the top change items and the ones that make the biggest difference for the required effort, the biggest bang for the buck, and ask yourself what needs to change. And it can be a whole bunch of things, like the clarity of roles, the participation and communication, decision process design. It might be norms of behavior. There's a long list of what might need to change, and you're not going to do it in just one cycle, okay? So create a realistic set of goals and set them. My time frame typically is like 4 to 6 months cycles, and usually 2 to 3 cycles will do it. So we go from picking the top ones to then going and proceeding with the transformation. This ultimately, when you're through a cycle of this kind of change, you have to celebrate and you have to say, okay, did we really get there? You create a shared commitment to this, you clarify the changes, you have to answer the question, how will we know if we've really accomplished it? And you want to make sure all the key parties, especially the leadership team, have committed, where things like total quality management were change programs in organizations that were big a while back. There, the leadership team was able to wave the flag and was other people that were going to do the change. When we get into the decision process, it gets right to the core of the leadership functions, and you have to have the leaders buy in and be willing to say, we will lead the way and demonstrate and become role models. And that means they allow others to remind them. If their behavior is not consistent with what they had said we are committed to, it's okay for someone saying, are you right now really driving this without listening to understand? You're listening to debate, okay? That kind of a change behavior, for example. And so everybody has to buy in. They have to be willing to have an honest assessment, and the most senior people have to be on board. Once you do that, you reinforce the change to the new habits. And that means practice, practice, practice. Repetition of new habits is key. Habits don't change of organizational habits is just like personal habits, a matter of a lot of repetition. Everybody buys in, and you start valuing the successes and failures, and you want it that way. You, as in most of these programs, communicate, communicate, communicate. When things go wrong, encourage people to apologize and move on. Don't accept denial or social loafing, as we call it, of people kind of letting others do the work and stepping out. And do celebrate when things go right, measure progress. 6 weeks might be the shortest time where you can see something, and that would be a kind of a midway or a early stage of saying, are we on the right track? And whatever your stage one might be, if it's a 4-month cycle or a 6-month cycle, again, really do measure at the end of that. And one of the end products of each cycle is, do we have to have another stage? And repeat the process until you've reached it. And what we find is 2 or 3 cycles should do it if you have real leadership support. It's the leadership is real key, and if you're not among the leadership, but you want to make this kind of thing happen, step one is to bring this to their attention and get them to want to be part of it.
Right. So we've outlined a number of steps that are important in terms of building a healthy decision culture. The first step we talked about is one thing that you have the option to explore. If you would like to understand more about your decision culture, you should consider conducting your own diagnostic survey. So the way that these surveys are set up, we have 36 unique examples of those dysfunctional decision behaviors, and we can administer for you this online survey. We would encourage you to invite your leadership and your colleagues and that list of various participants in the decision-making process. That feedback is confidential and anonymous, and you can invite as many participants as you like. So this is a great way to get insight into your organization. And the process would include first voting on the 12 dysfunctional behaviors that resonate with them. And then later you can ask for information about the frequency and importance of those. And after that survey, you'll have an opportunity to review the results with a decision professional for insights on what to do next. Are there some low-hanging fruit? Are there some things that we need to incorporate into our plan? So starting with that diagnostic is a great way to take those first steps.
We are going to go ahead and go to our first question. So one of our listeners was asking, What do you suggest for helping your staff when you make a decision they disagree with?
Mm. So say that again, a decision you disagree with?
Yeah, so where you're trying to, you've got a decision that they disagree with, but you're trying to help them
Oh,
get to that point so that they can
so,
actually make a decision
so
on it.
you put yourself in the role of the leader or the decision maker, and you're making a decision that you think most of your staff will not align with, right? That's uh, I think it depends greatly on the situation of the organization. If you're Jeff Bezos, it doesn't matter. Okay, there's a singular decision maker in that organization, and people know that the decisions go to him, and you don't disagree, you align. If you're in a highly collaborative environment, or let's say highly empowered environment like you are, Lynn, in a university where uh, you need alignment to get it done, I think as the leader, you very much have to take that into account and have the communication and depending on how much social capital you've built, you can say, look, on this one, just trust me and go with it, please. Or you may have to go and convince them before you realize, before you're ready to go say, let's go, because you know you wouldn't get true commitment without it. Okay?
Yeah, there's another piece of that. If you anticipate that there's a decision that's going to be problematic for your staff, one question is, how do you involve them in the decision-making process to begin with, so that you actually get the input that's necessary from them, and also help them build an understanding of why you're choosing the approach that you are choosing. And of course, that'll depend on the situation that an organization finds itself in. If you're in crisis management, if you have something that's urgent that needs to be taken care of now, then using a top-down approach may be the only way to do it. And it has to be just sort of a command and control. But that kind of leadership style doesn't work once you're trying to transition now into a situation where now you need more buy-in and growth, and continuing to move out of that crisis management requires a different kind of decision culture. So it really depends on your setting.
In a way, Jennifer, if you have the luxury of time, if you have enough time, then being in a situation of wanting to make the decision without which your whole staff is against, okay, is a failure already in the decision process. Because if you had engaged them correctly, like you were just explaining, Jennifer, then by that time we would have gained alignment, or they would have convinced you that you're wrong.
Right.
You know, you don't have to assume that you're right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's awesome, and it kind of goes back to some of those things that were popping up of the transparency and the trust. If those things are established ahead of time, you're going to have an easier time getting those decisions through. And if you are in crisis mode and you trust your leader, you're still apt to just go ahead and do it, even if you can't see the reasoning for it at that point. So kind of goes back to that whole what you've built and how you've built your culture to begin with. I think that's awesome. So I think we have time for one more question we're going to sneak in here. This person says, I'm a mid-level manager and I see the impact of our decision dysfunctions, but the tone is set by leaders above my level. How do I manage up to improve our decision culture?
I think a small step is getting them to agree to the survey.
Yeah.
You know, I think are we open enough to look at our dysfunctional decision behaviors, and then you guys can decide what to do next. That's a step you might be able to sell.
Another thing that you might consider is if the leadership is opening to have a conversation about a decision agenda, that's a very interesting place to start the conversation about which decisions require which kind of engagement from the various parties within the organization.
Yeah, the power of a decision agenda is really amazing. What we mean with a decision agenda is getting clear about what decisions we should be facing up to in the next, let's say, 3 months, okay? And which ones of those we want to make active, and when we make them active, then we have a way of getting to decision quality and clarity about who makes them and all of that. That's all part of the solution. I recently had a situation where we did this survey with the 36 questions, and this was the leadership in a school system, okay, a relatively large school system. And the top 8 issues or top 8 dysfunctions were solved by really changing the decision process and creating an open decision agenda which would be managed systematically. And it was like you had this fit of a solution that resolved a lot of the frustrations that all the direct reports had with the superintendent. Okay, so sometimes the solutions can solve a lot of the frustrations if you have the right one. It's just like in medicine, you know, you start out with a lot of ways that things can go wrong, and there's some key fixes that might solve more than you realized. Okay.
I like that. I like that. Start with the small things. Work your way up. So I want to thank Jennifer and Carl one more time, and I also want to thank our participants for spending your time and energy with us here today. We are at time, so we are going to sign off, but we want to thank you and tell you that if you need anything, we're here to help. Please contact us, and we would love to be able to do something with you, and hope to see you in a program or working on a survey or something else with us very soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.